Morning, Randy.
Morning, Joe.
I was gonna say, Randy's been gone for 5.5 years.
Right.
There's Joe.
To send you the building file.
Okay.
What is the forecast? It's gonna rain later, maybe?
Yeah,
I hadn't even checked.
it's like 30%, or it was 30%, but I think it changes each day.
Yeah,
So, and I think 11 was the latest that some food trucks
can
would be able to
cancel.
come out,
Yeah.
But Joe's just right now grabbing the building plans to kind of tie it in with the budget amendment. So what we're going to be discussing today is what's on for second reading at town council. We are going to be expanding this building. So if you've heard us talk about the town hall annex and the town hall garage.
Yep.
We're appropriating money for that project. And one of the items that we're going to be discussing specifically is appropriating money out of our accommodations tax fund. I just kind of gave them a brief overview. Joe? What we're gonna be discussing today.
Just sent the files to you. They're really big.
We've got Randy, we've got Joanne, we've got Ron, Susan, and Stuart, so we have a quorum.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for doing a special call meeting. I understand Catherine just gave you an update on the purpose of this meeting. We are currently working with council to do a budget amendment, and this is tied to construction of an expansion of town hall. I guess an annex to town hall, as well as construction of a new garage. And as soon as those files come through, I know we talked about it with the PATS committee. I don't remember if we talked about the project with this committee yet or not. I don't think we have. But basically the need for these two projects are being driven by the growth that we've had internally over the last couple of years. When I got here, there were 3 full-time employees. We're now up to 9. We have several part-time employees who are working at various times during the day. We're at the point now we're doubling people up in offices. We literally have people up in the attic right now. So the need is there for additional office space for our staff. The new garage will house all of our vehicles, but we've also, in the last year, we brought all of our buildings and grounds function in-house. There used to be a contracted service. We terminated that contract. You've probably seen Robert working out on the right of way. He came on board last April. So we're now pretty much doing all that in-house. There's some things where he still brings in outside contractors like pine straw and those type of things. It will take him weeks to do the pine straw. He did it all by himself. But so now we have 3, soon to be 4 vehicles. We have all of the equipment, all of the supplies, the materials, everything that goes with that. So also part of this project is construction of the garage. If you can pull up the site plan. Catherine's going to pull up the site plan so you can see exactly.
Which one?
Should be like the 2nd page. Zoom out of that, go back.
So is the expansion driven mostly by the increase in the landscaping crew or by the building boom that we have?
Neither. Well, I mean, I guess partially both, but it's a combination of a lot of different things. So in the last 2 years, we've brought on a full-time zoning person, which is Tyler. And he's doing new construction, but he's also reviewing renovations, anything basically that needs a permit. We brought on Robert, who's doing buildings and grounds. We have, a short-term rental compliance manager, which we promoted Nicole, who was our admin assistant, into that position. And her job is really just dealing with short-term rental compliance and permitting and inspection and enforcement. We have added a full-time media and events person, Robin. And half of her salary is funded by accommodations tax, which is why we're going to be making this request here today. We hired Beth to replace Nicole. We brought in a full-time code enforcement officer, which we've never had. We've just had part-timers kind of whenever they were available. So now we have someone here every Monday through Friday from 8 to 4. So I mean, we've added a lot of positions that there's probably been a need for years. Yes, never have. So part of it's from new construction, but I would say the majority of it's not. I mean, these are things that are going to continue to be needs even after the boom we've had over the last 2 years stops. I mean, we're always going to be in a hurricane prone area. There's always a need to disseminate information to the public. We're kind of stepping more into events now with Chowtown and, other stuff we've had or are looking at doing. So it's something that is, I think, permanent. So obviously the need is there to, house the people. If any of you are familiar with this building, we have no storage. The only storage we have is these shelves or these cabinets we built a couple of years ago. This council chambers is very small. So as part of the new building, we're gonna basically double the size of our meeting space. Right now, we don't even have a conference room. We had to convert it into offices. So we'll have a new conference room. We kicked the mayor out of his office when we hired Tyler. So the mayor will have a new office. So we have all these needs for the town. And we've been working with an architect, Mike Karamis, who does a lot of work out here on Seabrook. And this is the pretty much the site plan. There's still going to be some details. He's waiting on his civil engineer to finalize those, but the two new construction areas are highlighted in purple. So the one on the bottom, that's the town hall annex or the extension of town hall, basically doubling the footprint of our existing space. And then the new building is up on the top in the middle there in purple. That's the garage area. So some of the other things you'll see on this site plan is moving the driveway down a little bit. That driveway where it sits right now is actually acts as a dam. So whenever we have really heavy rain, it pools right there. So we'd like to redo the driveway, shift it down, which will also make it the primary public entrance will be kind of in that corner area of the new annex. If you can point to that, the top left corner of the new annex. So that's, you're on the left.
My left.
Yeah, go left. Yeah. Okay. So this area right here will be the new main public entrance. So we'll have a stairway, kind of like a more of a open, inviting atmosphere reception area down in this area. The new council chambers would be in the back. We'd have offices, and I can show you the actual drawings in a second. So for the primary public access, it'll be a straight shot now coming in from Seabrook Island Road. You park somewhere up in this area. This would be the primary access. And the existing portion of town hall is really going to be more of like the business contractor service center type area. So we have all of our licensing and permitting housed on that side, and then mostly administrative functions in the new annex. One of our biggest pet peeves is the parking spaces. When you come in on the existing driveway, we have some 45-degree angle parking. For whatever reason, those are not regulation sized parking spaces. So anytime something bigger than Catherine's Prius parks there, it blocks this driveway. So also as part of this project, we're going to be kicking out, widening this driveway, having full pull in 90-degree parking spaces. We're adding several up in this area, straightening all these out, adding some parking. Potentially, these may or may not be included, adding some parking up in this area. And then basically a whole new, we have the existing lot, which you can kind of, can you see it on that one? Yeah, you can kind of sort of see it under here, but that's all going to go away. It'll be reoriented, perpendicular to the street. And expanded. And then of course we have the garage up in this area. We do have a couple spaces shown on the plan. These green spaces right here, those are actually planned to be electric vehicle charging stations. We have gotten a commitment from Berkeley Electric to install at no cost to the town some electric vehicle charging stations, which as of right now, the closest electric charging station is off of Maybank Highway at the Crown Apartments. So you think about all the people who come out here to Seabrook and Kiowa, even the people who live here. There's no public place to charge your electric vehicles. So that'll be included as part of this project too. The area we're excited about all of it, but it's not on this plan quite yet. It will be when we have the full site package. We have a landscape architect working on it right now. But this area in between the annex and the new parking lot is a good sized green area. And as we were working on the layouts and the designs, knowing the success we've had with our food truck event and other things that we would love to host here, but have never had a space to do it. What we're looking at is turning this into kind of like a public green or an event type space. So for this first phase, it's really just going to be a pretty much a landscaped open area. It'll probably have some sort of central point here in the circle, but there would be sidewalks coming in from this area, sidewalks coming in across from the new parking area up to the new entrance to Town Hall. But what we viewed this as is basically a spot where if you've ever been to Chowtown and you sit on a picnic table on the blacktop on a 95-degree day, it's not the most pleasant experience. This would be kind of the designated place where when we had events, people would naturally go. So we would set up all the picnic tables in that area. For the food truck events, we could still have, food trucks either over here, then use the rest for parking. But this would just be kind of a natural place where you could go congregate. And then future phases, not part of this project, what we would like to do is possibly even a small stage or amphitheater up in this area. So when we host the symphony, for example, we could actually have a place where we could host that here at Town Hall. Also potential future phase, maybe even doing like a picnic pavilion or some sort of amenity also back in this area. The civil's working on actually a pond that we would do back here. So, you have all this impervious area, including up front. All that water needs to go somewhere, so we would direct it into a pond behind town hall. So also part of that future phase would include, the potential to amenitize that with extending some walking trails further back into the property and around the pond. So the future phase stuff we're not looking at today. We're looking at the annex, the garage, the parking improvements, and this plaza area. So the total cost we're kind of working with right now is assumed to be in the ballpark of about $3.5 million. Council is in the process and has already given first reading approval to a budget amendment to move funds from various locations into it's called a designated fund, like a capital project type fund, where council can set aside and designate money for future projects. Right now it has, I think, 1.2 or $1.3 million in it. We have close to $1,900,000 some odd thousand from the American Rescue Plan, ARPA, which came from the federal government. Council's planning to move that money towards this project, which gets us over $2 million. We have in our general fund balance, we have an excess or a surplus in there, so moving some funds over from the general fund balance into this project. And we were still a couple $100,000 short of our target of $3.5 million. So what we looked at was at the end of last year, we closed our fiscal year 2022 accommodations tax with about almost 445,000 in our fund balance. By law, we have to spend that within 2 years. Because portions of the project would be tied towards tourism related activities, either, some portion of the square footage, which is where we'll house Robin. And like I've already said, half of her position is paid for by ATAX because she does promotions and events. So a portion of the annex, we could legitimately say is a tourism related expense because it's housing the person who will be doing that activity. But probably more than anything is the plaza area, which is going to be a public space where we can have events and activities that we've never really been able to adequately host here at our municipal complex in the past. So our recommendation to council and to this committee is to commit from that fund balance $250,000 towards will basically be moved from ATAX to the town facilities fund to be used exclusively for this project. The 445,000 in the fund balance, that's a little bit misleading because if you remember in this year's budget, council did vote to spend more than we budget to bring in. We had about $200,000 in improvements to the bike path and the right of way, landscaping, amenities. We're getting ready to do the push button crosswalks. Biggest expense of the fence, replacing the fence. So even though we finished the end of last year at about 445,000, we are going to be using some of that this year. So there's not necessarily 445,000 available because we've already committed some of that. But there is still money available. If this budget amendment gets approved, we won't be taking it down to zero based on our current budget, estimated to be about 25,000 left over in that fund balance, assuming all the revenues and expenditures come in as expected. If for some reason they didn't, we've already had this discussion with council, we would probably hold off on doing the fence this year and then just not spending some of the money that's already been budgeted, and we would rebudget for that next year. So we have the funds in our fund balance. By law, we have to spend them within 2 years. We have a project. Again, we're not saying do the whole $3.6 million project. It's less than 10% of the project for the component that you can say is tied towards the personnel that's doing advertising, promotions and events, and the space that will house those activities and events. So our recommendation is to move $250,000 to the facilities fund to put towards that project. And I know I just threw a lot at you. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer those. And we do have the interior drawings of both of those buildings too, if anyone has any interest in seeing those.
I know that Randy had a question about the limits that we can allocate based on the purpose of ATAX. It sounds like a lot of the purpose focused around the residents and guests.
Yeah, we certainly couldn't fund the entire project because I would say the majority of it is geared towards just general operations of the town. When I went in and tried to quantify the percentage of the building construction that we could say is tied towards tourism. And basically for that, we have a formula we use based on the personnel and how much time they are committed towards, what we would consider a tourism related activity. Not even including the plaza. I think we were at about 8% of the total project cost. And when you add the plaza on top of that, I mean, that's going to be well over probably 15% of the total project cost. And what we have put in the 250 is whatever, 250,000 out of 3.5 million. I know it's well under 10%. So, using the formula-based approach, we can justify that those funds are not exceeding the tourism-related component of the project as a whole.
And how long will the project take?
As with any major construction project, hard to say with 100% certainty. Our goal is to put out a bid package this summer, sign, assuming the numbers come in within our estimated budget, sign a contract in the fall. Total construction time, I would venture, would be at least 18 months. Could potentially go up to 24. There's obviously a lot of variables with that. The biggest one right now has been the availability of materials and supplies, but weather is always a factor. If we have a hurricane or a storm come through, obviously those would add to those timelines. But I would say conservatively 18 months and probably a little bit longer from the time we issue the notice to proceed.
Hey, Joe, I got some other questions also. I like that the project's going to take probably 2 years because we are in the South. So that means we'll be able to carry over more ATAX as it goes, as it builds on. What do we have budgeted for none of the specific capital improvements is what I'll call them? What did we have already proposed or planned for this year? I'm just looking at that remainder dollar amount. I don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, so if you remember, if we took out the capital stuff that council approved to put towards the pathway, which I want to say was 200,000. If you pulled that out, we actually had more money than requests. So that was a kind of a conscious decision that was made this year because our fund balance has gone up quite a lot in the last couple of years during COVID, especially with people who've been working remotely, kids who are in school remotely. You know, we've far exceeded our budget estimates for the last couple of years. We're starting to see that turn now a little bit. You know, our first quarter state ATAX was actually down about 6% year over year. We'll have a better feel after we get our second quarter. If the second quarter comes in strong, it's probably not as much of a concern, but if the second quarter is continuing to trend downward, that would probably mean we'd be holding off on, at the very least, fence. But I mean, the fence is probably gonna be somewhere in the range of about $100,000. So if we ended up delaying a project, you know, that would be the one that we would push. And we'd still be able to meet all of our budgeted commitments for, you know, the outside organizations and the other items that were funded.
Well, and
I
just,
don't remember the exact number. It was originally it was 395,500. In the budget amendment, we've actually recommended dropping that 5,000, moving a couple thousand from beach patrol to another one of the, I think it was beach patrol. So it would be 390, and I think, no, I'm sorry, because we have to add the transfer to 70. So I think it was 460. Yeah, 460 looks right. Which was 390 in direct expenses and 72,000 to cover the tourism related portion of the personnel. So yeah, originally we were showing a deficit of 175, but 200,000 of that was for the projects on the pathway.
Well, how much money expires immediately?
Well, none of it expires immediately. We have 2 years to spend it.
2 years from when it comes in.
Yes, correct.
So, and we have a big pile of money here that is rotating.
The approach I and others have always taken is when we're spending money, we're spending the money we collected 2 years ago first.
So we're not
First in, first out.
anticipating running up against any 2-year deadlines
I don't think so,
shortly.
but if we run up like, you know, massive fund balances, that's something that's probably gonna be noticed when we submit our reports.
Exactly,
And, you know, at the end of last year, we were sitting on almost $500,000.
exactly.
So, you know, we need to start spending that money down. And like I said, we've done part of it this year with the pathway, and then putting some towards the town hall project would, you know, get us, if everything came in as budgeted, would reduce that balance down to about 25,000.
From 400 roughly.
so just to let everyone know, your numbers for the second quarter and for this year are going to be down 15 to 20% on rental guests. So we can predict that pretty closely right now. So that's one concern. The other concern, Joe, and I think I sent you and Kathleen a note, was the article in the paper not too long ago about the state being able to take that ATAX money and allocate it for the low-income housing. How will that impact that? Do you know if Charleston County can then hold that money back that we get, because I'm assuming it goes through Charleston County? Will they hold that money back where we won't get that same allocation every year that we're expecting?
Well, we're talking, if you're talking about the county, we're talking about a totally different pool of funding. What this committee deals with is state ATAX. The county has an accommodations tax that they, basically everything they collect within our town limits, they keep 80% and they give us 20%. And that's the formula that they have in place. What the amendment to the state statute did was it increased the number of eligible items that you can use accommodations tax for, and that's both state and local, I believe. So if the county decided they wanted to take a larger chunk of the county's accommodations tax and put it towards affordable housing, I mean, it's their accommodations tax, they can spend it however they see fit. So I mean, if they did that, it could potentially reduce our allocation, but that's a totally different fund from the one that this committee reviews. This committee reviews the state accommodations tax. And if you remember, like, you know, if you looked at the application before, it lists a bunch of projects that are eligible for using accommodations tax. So, you know, tourism, promotion, capital projects, which are tied to tourism. I think beach renourishment's on there. Operations, if you're in an area with a high concentration of tourism. Basically, all they did is they've added affordable or workforce type housing as an eligible use for accommodations tax funds. And really the driver for that is you have so many hotels and, you know, lodging industry businesses are having such a hard time, particularly in the Charleston area, finding employees because they can't afford to live here. So they're basically, the state agreed and said, well, we'll allow, you know, I think it's some percentage or some portion of the collections can be used towards programs that are designed to promote affordable housing. So it's an eligible use, but not something that's mandatory. So if, you know, if there was a need for affordable housing out here on Seabrook and the town decided, you know, we want to set up, you know, some program either to build or offset the cost or whatever, then, you know, that's a request that could be submitted to commit a portion of our state ATAX funds, and then it would go through the committee and then on to council, just like any other request. But it's not a requirement that you use the funds for that.
So it would be a request-based allocation then?
Yeah, and you would consider it with, you know, any other request, like, you know, the town submits requests, you have Alan Fleming and, you know, all the different groups that come in every year. It would just be one request that goes through the committee review process. But it basically all it's doing is saying it's now eligible to use state accommodations tax towards programs that promote affordable housing.
Thanks for that explanation.
Yep. And we did, to your first comment about the reduction in rental activity, that's something we've been watching fairly closely. Because our fourth quarter last year was down year over year. Our first quarter this year was down year over year. We haven't received our second quarter. We'll get it in July. But we do look at things like the POA, the monthly rental passes that they're issuing. And those were actually down. April year over year, we're down, I think, like 29%. Now it's hard to say at this point because they've also put new rules and policies in place on rental properties. So they've restricted the number of passes that they issue. And I think it's now like $40 or $50 to get a pass. So it's incentivizing people, you know, not to bring in as many vehicles. So I don't know that the number of, you know, rental activity as a whole is down 29%, but, you know, looking at their monthly year over year data, they've issued 29% fewer passes. So, you know, if you're saying you guys are seeing, you know, 15 to 20, that tied to their policy changes, that's probably, I mean, that's probably in line with what we would expect to see in terms of a potential reduction. And like I said, we did have that conversation. It was actually yesterday afternoon. We had that conversation with council. Basically, we ran all of our numbers. When we do our budget projections, we try to be conservative. So, I mean, if it went down 5% from last year, that's basically what we budgeted our revenues to be this year. We could go down year over year 13.1% and basically fund everything we budgeted this year, and we completely deplete the fund balance. If the total revenues were down more than 13.1%, or trending in that direction, that's when we would recommend holding off probably on the fence project, which, like I said, is estimated to be about $100,000. So that would keep us in the black this year, and then we would reevaluate that and probably resubmit it for next year.
Randy was also asking if we get the club statistics as well.
We are not on their direct mailing list, but I did receive a copy of those yesterday, and they too were also showing across the board reductions on pretty much everything that they track for renter use of club facilities. So this is not entirely unexpected. Jerry and Pat are Jerry Finke and Pat Fox are short-term rental ad hoc committee for the last 3 years have been saying, and I know people have disagreed with their comments, but I think it's playing out how we've expected it to. We've seen a bump from 2020 through 2022, and we've always been of the opinion that a lot of that has been driven by COVID restrictions. So people not being able to travel to places they may have been able to travel in the past, including internationally, but also just the number of people who've had flexibility in their work and schooling options. So you can't go on vacation if if your kids are in school, but if your kids are doing school remotely, or if you're working remotely or something like that, I mean, you can do that at the beach just as easily as you can, sitting at your condo in New York City. So we've always been of the assumption that the last couple of years have been an anomaly, and as things return back to normal, we'll start to see these numbers go back down. And I think, we're at that point now where every piece of data that we're looking at is showing that that's taking place.
And thank you, Randy. I did just see your note too about the email that you sent me, and I forwarded it to you, Joe. He just sent me the May 2023 club statistics.
I got it yesterday.
Okay.
What are you asking of us this morning?
To recommend approval of the budget amendment to transfer over $250,000 from the ATAX fund balance to the town facilities fund to be used towards the capital project we discussed, the garage, well, not so much the garage, but the town hall annex and the plaza area.
I guess I'm a little uncomfortable doing that without seeing the context of all the other requests that I guess we're going to consider in August. Is
Those
that
will be
right?
for next year.
Right, so you're saying we're taking out of the 444,000 that has accumulated 250,000 and just shifting it to the capital account.
Correct.
And if we didn't do that, what would happen to that 250,000?
We'd probably have to take the plaza out and not have a event type space.
Hmm.
And if, like I said, the cost of this project that's tied to tourism is more than 250,000, or that you can logically say is in some way tied to tourism. So I mean, council would have to likely take it out of, well, ultimately you're making a recommendation, so council can still.
So we're
move it
not taking it
if you
away
recommend
from
it
beach
to not.
patrol and you know, all the other uses that we have for ATAX.
Because that's already funded for this year.
Yeah,
It
everything
is
is
funded,
everything
and
is
this is
funded.
really an accumulation from COVID years. I'm
From prior
assuming.
years, yes. Now, this year we had more money than we had requests.
Right,
Now,
Correct.
we ended up doing 200,000 towards the pathway, which was just kind of
Right.
a one-off type thing. You know, we don't know who's gonna request what next year or what our revenue projections will be. Probably won't have those until, you know, August or, really, we try to nail them down when we get our third quarter, which by that time, the committee's already made its recommendations, because we get our third quarter in October. So the committee's already
Right.
made its recommendations. Depending on where, and the third quarter is always our biggest quarter, because that covers July, August, September. We get our money quarterly from the state.
right,
So, you know, we'll come in August when the committee meets and we'll have an estimate. And my hunch is we're gonna be very conservative with next year's estimate.
right,
But we'll have an estimate, and then, you know, by the time you've made your recommendation, it goes to council, they're in their adoption process. That's when we get our third quarter data, and that number may go up or down. If it goes up, they may want to add some. If it goes down, they may take some projects out, but I
right.
mean, we won't know what gets submitted until August, and we won't have a really good idea of our funding level for next year until probably October.
Could we defer this decision until we know what's coming in for next year?
Council wants to go out for bid in July, and they need to have we basically need to have the funding committed for the project to move forward.
So are you able to tell, because we don't have it in front of us from this, we're talking from last year, are you able to tell us roughly how much we allocated towards requests other than the 200 for the pathway, a total? What we allocated and gave away basically last year? Because I think what I'm hearing is the concern is we don't want to, you know, place where we're going to short anybody next
Right.
year for requests by doing this. So we need that assurance that there's enough to cover all bases.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm not
so-
speaking for
Well put.
everybody, but that's the sense I'm getting.
So not including the 200,000 that we did for the pathway, this year's budget, council funded, it was like 195, plus we also had some personnel related, which we did as a transfer to the general fund. So it was 195 plus about 72,000. So it was about 262,000. And that was against projected revenue of 292,000. So we actually had less in requests than we had
Right.
in budgeted revenue. And that was when the decision was made to do the pathway improvements. And so we used the rest of the about 30,000 and then took the 170 out of the balance.
So that extra 30, we're shifting pots around here. So that extra 30 basically went into the
Towards the pathway.
towards the pathway.
Mhm.
Okay. And we've been averaging about obviously it's been up the last few years.
Mhm.
But we've been averaging about 260 to 2, and we got 290, so. I'm just trying to do the math and just,
Yeah, so I mean, just for context, if you look at 2019, which was the last, the last regular year pre-COVID, now a lot's changed since 2019.
correct,
In 2020, we implemented the short-term rental permitting requirement, so we're now permitting and verifying that every property that's renting is actually licensed, collecting and paying their tax. So this isn't all driven by growth. You would be amazed at how many people were renting property and we're not collecting and remitting accommodations tax.
Well, and we have to keep
But it was, I'm sorry.
Well, those people are on the staff, so they will continue from year to year. You're right, we'll have to keep paying them.
Well, they're being paid from a separate. People who are doing the enforcement are being paid from the
Mhm.
permit fees that we collect from short-term rental properties.
Uh-huh.
I'm just talking. Just from having that permitting process in place. We're now, well, I mean, now we're mostly compliant, but a couple of years ago. I mean, there were. I can't even tell you how many of them didn't even know they were supposed to be collecting. State and county ATAX that now are.
Mhm.
So some of this has been driven by the increase in people visiting that we've had, but not all of it. A lot of it's just better compliance than we had in 2019. But just for context, in 2019, we had $121,000. And last year we had 308.
Mhm.
So, I mean, when groups, including the town, we submit funding requests ourselves when, you know, for fireworks, different events that we have. Groups should not be dependent on these funds. It's because there's no guarantee what's going to happen from one year. You know, we've increased everybody the last couple of years because the revenues have been far over what we budgeted.
And we have to, as we.
That's not going to be the case
Right.
in perpetuity.
And as we look forward, we have to keep that in mind that there may not be as much. So doing simple math, I probably needed another cup of coffee this morning, but so we have the 444 accumulated, we take away 250, we're at 194. If we get 250, 260 granted to us next year, that puts our balance, ATAX balance back at about 450,000.
But you did not include the extra, because we did 200,000 to the pathway. So we used 30 of what we still had left over, plus taking 170. So we had about 445. We dropped that by 170. Now we're dropping it by another 250,
Okay,
which would leave about 25,000 left over.
gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's the margin.
If the revenues came in as budgeted, which they may not, and if they do, that's something we're gonna continue to watch. If they don't, then that's when I said we would pull the fence, which is probably $100,000. It would still stay in the budget, but we just wouldn't spend the money this year.
Yeah, I actually like that strategy. I mean, I think the facility is probably needed for everyone, guests and the town and the residents. But I like Joe's approach. If we run into a budget issue, let's pull the fence back. And maintenance, maybe do the maintenance on it. We have to, but maybe not put a nice new fence in yet until the revenues come back. I think I would be okay with the allocation if we hold to that pulling that money back from the fence. Because I mean,
Yeah.
those events we do have, just like the Child Town, just like the fireworks, just like, you know, the Alan Fleming, those all are directly related, I think, or mostly related to rental guests.
Are there any, have y'all been able to quantify any numbers as far as Chowtown during the summer? Or are you able to determine, it may, you may not be able to, but are you able to determine the X number of people that show up? Do we know how many are renters and how many are residents? I know you probably not.
No, but I can just tell you from the last event that we had on the 31st, we doubled in size. And by double in size, I mean, last year we had maybe max 600 people. This time we probably had around 1,200 people,
Wow.
if not more.
And
just
that
from people
obviously
coming in and
jumps
out.
up when we get into high season.
Mhm.
So then you can figure that maybe 50% of them roughly are perhaps guests versus residents.
Yeah,
Or
I
even
mean, it's a
even third.
mixture. I couldn't tell you a percentage.
Yeah,
It's-
even a third.
It's a mixture. You see people you know, and you
Right.
see a lot. I mean, if you see somebody and they're coming out with young kids, just looking at the
They're not
demographics
full-time
of the
residents,
island, they probably don't.
Right,
And we have a lot of families that are coming out to the event.
Sure.
A lot of small children, babies. You know, you know, they probably, with reasonable certainty, they probably don't live here.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I think as committee members, we want to make sure that we're it's being supported the way that we theorize and grant the money. Or recommend, not grant. We recommend.
And Robin's done, our communications and events manager, has done a really good job of promoting the event and
Yeah.
reaching out to a
Definitely.
very wide audience.
Yeah, we actually had a lot more people come in from outside the area. I mean, last year was people who were already here and just happened to either hear about it or driving by and saw it going on. Was it in the city paper?
It was in the city paper, it was in all of the local news outlets. She's done posts on Facebook. She's also casted a wider net for different food trucks that are coming out.
It may definitely be drawing people, families from Johns Island.
Yeah, and I think beyond. I think she was contacted by people from well outside this area who were, interested in coming out.
Yeah,
Well, how do I get behind the gate?
You don't have to, right?
It's
so
publicly accessible.
Randy, I think it was you that said that you felt kind of comfortable with that. Understanding that if we fund this, if we recommend funding this, that if the fence project has to be delayed, then that's the understanding. Is that correct? What you were getting at, Randy?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. And if there were bad parts of the fence, can we not just do a maintenance function instead of a whole new brand new fence at this point?
Since we are in theory would be recommending this amount to capital, I guess we would be saying with the recommendation that it be put towards this versus that this would be the priority versus the fence that we had done at some point, or we had recommended at some point. Not making sense. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm trying to make sense.
I think what you're trying to say is in the motion for your recommendation.
Yes.
That you would say, we move to recommend as long as the fence is postponed.
Correct. Thank you, Kat.
Yeah. Would you like to make that motion?
I will make that motion. Thank you for getting those words out.
Yeah.
So basically, the recommendation is to reduce the amount towards the pathway improvements by 100,000. Doing 250,000 for the transfer. And basically you'd be left with 124 if all the numbers. So basically not doing the fence this year.
Correct.
Right.
So essentially
We're switching our priorities.
decommitting
Yes.
100,000 from the
Right.
fence.
We're switching our priorities.
Right. That makes sense.
That's what I was trying to get to. Yeah.
Do we have a second?
I would be happy to second the motion.
Any other questions or comments on the motion right now? Let us,
Randy's still on?
Randy's still on, but I think he's muted. I think he has to run into another meeting shortly. Let us take a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And Joanne, I see Ron is giving a thumbs up. I mean, Randy's giving a thumbs up. I'm taking that as a yes.
It's not a thumbs up.
Oh.
I abstain.
Abstain.
And I voted yes.
All right. With that, the motion carries and it is approved. Passes.
Have we made an appointment yet for the vacancy?
No, so just to close out the meeting, we are still waiting to fill Joe Pontuti's seat. He no longer works for the club and is no longer eligible to be on the committee, so council moved to remove him. We are still looking to find eligible applicants to fill the hospitality seat. We did get some applicants in and we asked the state Because there was one applicant who was retired and did have a lot of good qualifications for this committee. However, for this specific hospitality seat, they must be an active member in the hospitality industry. Now, they don't have to be a resident. They could come from the club, but they can also come from any of the other businesses. It just has to be related to tourism. So it could come from like a restaurant or a bar or any other business owner. It could even be a homeowner who is actively doing a short-term rental.
And I'm just gonna say, I think it's probably important to have the connection with the club. So that we're not fragmented.
A full disclosure, we did tell the club if they are interested to have somebody apply, and we were told that they are probably not going to have somebody apply.
Okay.
If somebody else has reached out to them and says, hey, would you like to apply?
Okay,
It's,
I'm just
yeah.
kind of
we-
thinking of the past and history
Sure.
and how we all work together.
We agree, and the outreach was made, and
Okay.
they were not interested in having
Okay,
someone on the committee, so, that's why we
gotcha.
broadcast it, and we got a bunch of applicants, we had a couple, good applicants. We had one which would be phenomenal on this committee, but he's retired from like 30 or 40-year, career working in the hospitality industry. Served on CVB boards.
Yeah.
Would be an excellent addition to this committee, but he's not actively engaged in.
Yeah.
In the hospitality industry, so wouldn't be eligible.
Joe, can you,
I was
Yeah.
gonna reach back out to the club again. I was gonna reach back out to the club again.
well, can I ask a question before you do that? Can you shift positions? So if somebody's holding a position now that would be qualified for the position that needs to be working in the hospitality business, can you move that person into that position and then fill? So I'm asking, Anne Marie O'Rourke or Ann Brasco owns Sandpiper Management, which is short-term rentals. Could she fill that position, and then could her position go to that well-qualified retired person?
She is already currently serving as a hospitality
All right.
position.
Okay, never mind, sorry.
So under state law, we have to have 4 who are from the hospitality. 4 of the 7 have to be from the hospitality industry. And 2 of those 4 have to be specifically from the lodging sector within the hospitality industry. So Anne is actually serving as both, so she is hospitality and also lodging, and I think Randy is too.
Randy would be too.
Right, okay.
So they satisfied those 2 out of the 4. But we still need to have an additional person who's either coming from lodging, food and beverage, I think activity type stuff would be eligible. But they have to be actively, and I think even promotion,
Yes.
advertising, promotion. But they have to be actively engaged in that industry. And it does not have to be a resident of the town. But I mean, I think we're looking for them to have some tie to the town. So I think when Joe was on, does he live on Johnson?
Yes, he did.
But he obviously worked out here, so, we'd still be looking for some tie to the town, but you don't necessarily have to reside here.
What about any of the people that provide services to the town for the short-term rental guests, like the people from like Lightning Bugs or the bike people or any of those, would they qualify?
I would probably have to clarify with the state on those applicants, but I can get back to you.
Okay,
I'm not sure. I've just never seen one like that.
and the club says absolutely they don't want to put anybody forward, because one of their bartenders lives, in Bohicket Marina Village, I think still.
Leah,
Yeah.
Leah's no longer
I was gonna say, yeah. I thought Leah
Oh, she's
left.
not? Well, I dropped out of the club a few years ago, so that's what I know. Okay. All right, well,
I think, as Randy said, it may be worth another ask to the club.
yeah.
We had a meeting, we should have pitched to Michelle yesterday.
Yeah. But we can reach out again.
I mean, if we don't have one, then we just
As
move
long
forward
as,
with 6 members, as long as we have a quorum, we can still operate.
Correct.
But it is still open, so through that out, if any of you know anyone who is active in that specific industry, I would encourage them to submit a volunteer application. And yes, somebody who's a bartender out here would be eligible. If you know any others. I think that's all we had.
that's all I have. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second. Thank you.
Seconded. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, Stuart.